Okay, so today we're going to have a go at answering this 12-mark question. It's an evaluative question. I'm going to start by creating a table, a very short table. So the question is, the Trinity is the most helpful way of describing God. So just going to jot down a few agree points. Well, let's remind ourselves what the Trinity is the belief that there's one God and there are three forms, one God in three persons. So we can say that's all three persons, and that's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Which is a statement of faith and used in liturgy and service, which connects us to another point. We can say it's widely used in worship. It's recited. So we're saying it's recited, that means it's said in worship. And it explains God's nature. Right, let's write a few disagree points now. Hard to explain, difficult to understand. I mean, how can one God be three persons? So we can say that's a disagree point. It's not in all parts of the Bible. It's only from the New Testament that we hear of God being the Son, of course. Not in all parts of the Bible. Maybe there are alternatives, easier ways to understand, to describe God. Okay, so that will do. That will kind of give us something to work with. Right, I'm now going to go answering this. Okay, so we start with the definition. Okay, those persons are Father, okay, so we have a quick definition. Don't want it to be any longer than that, really. And then we can go straight into an agree point. It's central to the Christian faith, isn't it? So let's go straight in with that point. Actually, we need to add that up there. That just means it's very important to the Christian faith. Each of the persons let's give an example now. Okay, so we've gone in for one of the forms of one of the persons of the Trinity is God the Father, and this allows us to understand God as caring. So that's very helpful for Christians, perhaps. And the Holy Spirit was sent down the day of Pentecost, and that's still present in the world today and allows Christians to have a personal relationship with God. So we can add that as well. Doesn't need to be in quotation marks. Okay, and we can also add the fact that it's supported in the Bible as well. Jesus characterizes God in these terms. Okay, so we said that Jesus asked his disciples to baptize all nations in the name the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We tie this in with another point, which is actually that baptism still today uses the Trinity. So we can say, well, I'll come to that on the next point. We can say it's also recited in the Nicene Creed, which is what's said at the baptism. Okay, so we're going to come on to our second point now, which was about worship. The point up here we had is used widely recited in worship. Okay. So we say it's widely used in worship. Notice I'm saying another reason why as well. It's very clear that I'm stating a reason at this point, an agree point. And notice I'm referring back to the question as well, the most helpful way of describing God. So I'm answering the question. Then give an example. For instance, Trinity is recited in baptism. And it's also recited in Holy Communion. What's Holy Communion? It helps Christians remember Jesus' sacrifice. Okay. And kind, of course. Right, how are we doing? Okay, we're going to come back to that point at the end, really, explaining God's nature, because it will allow us, we're going to go to some disagree points, I think, now. So, when I'm stating a disagree point, though, I'm going to use a word such as however or conversely. However will do, however. So it's clear that you're contrasting, you're going to a disagree point now. I'm referring to the question again. We can say here, actually I haven't got this as a disagree point, we should really have another, not everyone accepts it. I want to have that as our disagree point. So not every Christian accepts the Trinity. Denomination specifically. What's an example here? Well, one example would be the Unitarian Church. But they're still Christian. What might this suggest? Let's link it back now as well. What we've stated this, what might it suggest? It might suggest that we don't need the Trinity to describe God's nature. So you see I'm typing quite quickly, hence a few typos here. Okay. And we can again link this back to the Bible and say it's not actually stated in all parts of the Bible. And we've got that as a disagree point here. So, and it links again to it. Maybe it's not this idea as an disagree point is this idea that it might not be necessary to describe God in as three persons. And the Old Testament is, of course, where the creation story features, and we have this idea of God as a creator and God as omnipotent. All those things don't necessarily need the Trinity, so we're going to add that as well. Okay, so we've got a disagree point there. Let's come on to another disagree point here, which was this idea that it's hard to explain. This is a really big one, so a really big objection, let's say, so I'm going to emphasize that. I'm going to call it a major objection. It's hard to understand how God can be three persons. Why is it hard? Well, because they accept that there's one God, don't they, which we call monotheism, so monotheism. Let's define that. So it's obvious you know what the definition is. Okay, so we stated the worry. So it's hard to explain, isn't it, in words, and maybe it doesn't make sense in our heads either, so maybe we can make that as a second point. Does not make, let's call it logical sense, it doesn't make logical sense. For three things. Okay, so now I've got the main objection, then we can clarify what this might imply. So we go, for this reason, Trinity may be unhelpful as it causes confusion. At this point, I'm just going to insert a rhetorical question as well. Because the problem here is that we can't really describe the Trinity very easily. You might want to write very difficult to explain. I've put difficult, but you could write very difficult to explain to emphasize that. Regarded as helpful. You can choose your own words in phrasing that point. Rhetorical questions, fine. Essentially, we're asking a question which we're not actually answering in full because we can't, but we've got it in there because it emphasizes the problem. But use them sparingly for maximum effect. Okay. Right, let's come to think of another point. One of the things you've looked at in class with Mr. Stone and Miss Maris is analogies with water to help understand the Trinity. So maybe that's a good opportunity to introduce that as an idea at this point, as a way of responding to that worry. What was that analogy? It was water, I think. So the analogy was it can be a solid, liquid, or a gas. So what does this imply? Well, one substance may take three forms. So one substance. Okay, let's link this back then to the question. Okay, so we've got a nice response, and I think I want to come now to this point here, which was explain God's nature. God's quite mysterious, isn't he? So perhaps if we can't really describe God perfectly using the Trinity, or if it doesn't make that much sense, maybe that's no bad thing. So let's think how it might be it might be okay. Perhaps it reflects the mystery of God. The difficulty in explaining the Trinity perfectly is sort of represents his mysterious qualities about God. So we're actually going to make the objection into a kind of virtue of the Trinity, if you like. So that's moreover, because we're expanding upon that. So moreover, difficulty okay. So we have this idea that we're kind of mortal and finite, and God is infinite, so we can't really expect to be able to fully describe him. So let's say that then. So let's say now that the Trinity emphasizes God's mystery. And he's out of this world, so what the word here might be other world. I'm sure there's a more succinct word you could use. Right. So we're now turning the objection really on its head, and we're saying actually it's a good thing that it doesn't make full sense, although we can't fully explain it. Precisely because God can't be described in words. That's a really sophisticated point, I think, which could elevate an answer like this. Okay, let's conclude then. Okay, so the conclusion here just really summarises what we've argued for. We've thought about the objections, but on balance we've come to the view that it's a very central part of the Christian faith, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing that we can't fully explain it. So we could just, quick conclusion, it's very clear. Notice it's very clear what the position is in the conclusion. That's very important. Okay, let's have a quick review of this then. So the takeaway from this is really to define, start with the definition, but keep it very short, and then to go straight into an agree point or a disagree point. Make it clear to the reader that you're stating a reason here. One reason the Trinity is the most helpful way of describing God is, and we've got the reason there, and we're referring back to the question as well, importantly. We have reference to the Bible as well, which is important. For a 12 marker, it's essential. You'll notice that I haven't actually quoted the Bible. That's okay, as long as we're referring to a religious source or a religious text, that's sufficient. You can quote the Bible if you wish to, but it's not necessary. You'll still be referring to a religious source at this point. Okay, and we have some further examples as well. I'm expanding as well. For example, when we say that the Trinity is used in baptism, that was another agree point. We've got the separate agree point down here. Stated present in the world today is the Holy Spirit of God, the second agree point, and expanded as well. So we haven't just said it's used in Holy Communion, we've said, well, why is that important? Because it helps Christians remember Jesus as sacrifice for mankind. Okay, and then notice again for our disagree point, we're using words such as however, which is important, or conversely, or a word really which signifies that you are you're stating a disagree point at this point. And again, once we've outlined an objection that not every denomination accepts it, we're expanding upon that as well. We're saying this may suggest there are more helpful ways of describing God, and then we're giving an example as well. Use of key terms very important as well, such as denomination. That will allow for a more sophisticated answer, and also make it clear that you understand what those key terms are. So, for example, first, Christians accept monotheism. I've actually just defined it in the text as well there, the belief in one God. Okay, finally, yeah, the use of analogies as well. Again, when we're saying that we can use analogies to help explain the Trinity, we're sort of explaining the analogy as well. And then we're linking back to the question. And finally, just to make sure that that conclusion is really clear. Okay, I think what might really what might make this answer strong would be the fact that there's a level of evaluation at the end as well, in particular, with thinking about objections and agree and disagree points. We've managed to make a disagree point into an agree point really at the end. I hope you find that helpful, and if you have any questions, please do get in touch.